What's up, designers, and welcome back to Rempton Games. In today's installment of Evolution of Pokemon Designs, we're going to be taking a look at the 4th generation of Pokemon, which includes the games Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. As we're currently in Generation 8, this marks a big moment in the series as we are halfway done. As always, in this video, I'm going to take a look at the Pokemon of this generation to find any themes and trends. I'm going to see how new mechanics and technology have influenced the designs, and compare them to previous generations. Really quick, before we jump into it, I just want to say that this is a small channel that I'm working on in between doing school and work full time. And if you enjoy this type of content, it would really mean a lot to me if you could help this channel grow. Leaving a like or a comment always helps, and if you could share this video with a friend who likes Pokemon, that would be so amazing. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's take a look at how Generation 4 fits in with previous games in the series. These games find themselves in an interesting middle space because they're neither direct sequels like Generation 2, nor are they a soft reboot like Generation 3. Instead, these games fill a middle ground that's relatively unique among Pokemon games. They tell a unique original story in a new region with new characters, and yet the Pokemon selection is very heavily tied to previous generations. This generation introduces 107 new Pokemon, and 29 of them are either evolutions or pre-evolutions of older Pokemon. This represents over a quarter of all the new Pokemon introduced, and this is the highest proportion of Pokemon that are related to older Pokemon of any generation if you don't count things like Mega Evolution. In addition, unlike Generation 2, which also introduced a large number of new evolutions, but they were only related to Generation 1 Pokemon, Generation 4 introduces new Pokemon that are related to all 3 previous generations pretty evenly, which, in my personal opinion, helps make the wider world of Pokemon feel a little bit more connected. Speaking of which, this generation is quite possibly the most connected of any generation so far. While Gen 3 took a little bit of heat for not being able to connect to the games previous to it, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are the first games that are compatible with the generation before and after them. If you include the remakes of Fire Red, Leaf Green, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver, you can actually trade Pokemon back and forth between 5 different regions in these games. However, this isn't the only way that this generation attempted to make the Pokemon world more connected. A major theme of this generation is legends and myths, and they introduce a huge amount of lore and backstory for the Pokemon world. While previous generations have had legends such as the battle between Groudon and Kyogre or the Burned Tower, Generation 4 really takes this to the next level. For one thing, this generation introduces more legendary and mythical Pokemon than any other generation before it, with 14 total. Depending on whether you consider Meltan and Melmetal to be part of Gen 7 or Gen 8, they could still be tied for the number 1 spot. However, not only do they introduce a glut of legendary and mythical Pokemon, but they also introduce the Pokemon that are, lore-wise at least, still the most powerful that the Pokemon world has ever seen. These include the god Pokemon Arceus, who supposedly created the universe with his 1,000 arms, as well as his children Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. As the legend goes, there was once a void of nothingness in which a single egg appeared. This egg hatched into Arceus. Arceus then created Dialga and Palkia and gave them control over time and space. He also created Giratina, the Pokemon of antimatter, and banished him to the Distortion world for his violent behavior, which basically makes Giratina the Pokemon world equivalent of Satan. He also created the Lake Trio of Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit, which control willpower, emotion, and knowledge, which can be found in all humans and Pokemon. There is also Regigigas, who not only apparently created all of the other Regis out of stone, ice, and metal, but apparently moved the continents into place. This epic theme goes beyond the legendary Pokemon themselves, however. The Sinnoh region is shrouded in history and myth, and is not only considered to be the oldest region, but is also said to be the first place that Arceus created when he created the universe. There are a number of places in the Sinnoh region that are incredibly ancient or connected to various myths, such as Flow Aroma Town, Eterna City, Snow Point Temple, and the Spear Pillar. Even the starter Pokemon of this region play into this theme, as they're all based on real-world myths and legends. Empoleon is clearly inspired by Poseidon, especially with a trident-like design on his head and body. Torterra seems to be based on various myths about the world tortoise or turtle, particularly those found in Hindu mythology. Finally, Infernape is a clear reference to Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, a major character in the Chinese epic Journey to the West. This marks the first time that all three starter Pokemon will have a unifying theme, a trend that will continue in future generations. In addition, a number of non-legendary Pokemon are also given legendary backstories, such as Spiritomb, which is said to contain 108 evil spirits. Now that we have covered some of the themes and backstory, it's time to actually begin looking at the designs of these Pokemon. From looking at Generation 4 Pokemon, it's immediately obvious that the designs have become more detailed than previous generations. This may be due to the increased resolution of the DS screen over the Game Boy Advance. While the actual screens themselves are only slightly higher resolution, the Pokemon sprites are much larger, 80 by 80 pixels rather than 64 by 64. This results in nearly 60% more pixels per sprite than on the Game Boy Advance, which could be a major reason why Generation 4 Pokemon have a higher level of detail on average. This increased detail can be seen in a number of places. In previous generations, it was rare to see a Pokemon with 4 or more colors. However, in Generation 4, this is the norm. This generation contains a number of quite colorful Pokemon such as Luxray, Garchomp, Toxicroak, and Cresselia, and even Pokemon that may not be considered colorful such as Staraptor or Floatzel fit this description. Second, similar to previous generations, there are a number of recurring details on Generation 4 Pokemon, and many of these contribute to the more complicated designs of Pokemon in this generation. While adding additional detail in the form of stripes, rings, or loops is a common design choice in every generation, Generation 4 really takes this to the next level. Of all the details that are common in this generation, however, the most noticeable is certainly the spikes. Once again, Pokemon has a history of adding spikes or horns to traditionally non-spiky animals. Simply look at Seaking, Seal, or Cloyster to see how adding a single spike or horn was a common way of making an animal look just a bit more monstrous. This generation, however, went absolutely hog wild with the spikes, adding them not just to the forehead, but to the wrists, shoulders, wherever. The designs of Pokemon such as Lucario, Drapion, Bastiodon, Garchomp, and Rampardos are absolutely spectacular. While I generally try to avoid giving my own opinions in these videos, I think a good number of the Pokemon in this generation would look much better if they simply toned down one or two of the details. Let's take a look at a few examples to see what I mean. First, let's take a look at Perugly. As you can see, there's a lot going on with this design. From the boomerang-shaped head to the purple fingers at the tips of its ears, the squiggly whiskers, the curly tail, tiny feet. There are a ton of distracting design decisions going on here, and make the Pokemon overall look very cluttered. Suppose we simplified just one of these details, say the ears, and made them more traditionally cat-like. It could still retain its grumpy, spoiled attitude while having a bit cleaner overall design. Let's quickly look at a second example, this time an evolution to a previous generation, Ambipom. Ambipom is the evolution of Aipom, a mischievous little monkey Pokemon from Generation 2. Aipom is a relatively simple design. It's simply a purple monkey with a hand on its tail, and a troublemaking personality. Now look at Ambipom. First, you can immediately notice that we're adding a third color, a reddish shade in the ears and on the tips of the fingers. This not only makes the color palette more complicated, but has the added side effect of making the fingers look painfully swollen. The head shares a number of similarities with Apom's head, but adds a nose, a bowl cut, and 2 extra long strands on the top of the head. Personally, I find this nose marking to be probably the ugliest nose of any Pokemon. I think that this design could be significantly more pleasant by simply removing the nose and swapping out the gross new hands with hands that match Apom's originals. Sure, the new design maybe doesn't change all that much. It simply looks like a bigger Apom with 2 hands instead of 1, but I think it's enough change to make it recognizable as a different Pokemon, while still looking clearly connected to its pre-evolution and not adding unnecessary details that detract from the design. There are 2 additional major design decisions that I noticed about Generation 4 Pokemon. First, it moves away from the more jagged fur designs in previous generations to more rounded fur shapes. If you look at Pokemon like Glameow, Bidoof, Shaman, Buizel, Baniri, and even Luxray, you can see that the fur tends to have a much more rounded look. Don't get me wrong, purely sharp, jagged fur still exists in this generation, but I believe that this is the beginning of a softening of Pokemon designs that would continue for the next few generations. The second additional design decision is, paradoxically, the simplification or reduction of certain details. Compare, for example, the roses on Roserade's hands versus those on Roselia's. It is clear to see that Roselia's roses are much more realistic, while Roserade's are much more simplified. Similarly, look at the vines on Tangrowth versus Tangela, and it's clear to see that there is a certain amount of lost detail. Finally, if you look at the tongues of Licky versus Lickitung, there's a clear difference, with Lickitung's tongue looking much more organic. Finally, let's take a look at the legendary Pokemon of this generation, and there are a lot of them. First off, looking at this group as a whole, it's clear to see that the increased level of detail is equally present among these legendary Pokemon. Although legendary Pokemon have always had more complicated designs in general, so I think it's more fitting. However, another thing to notice is that a large number of these legendary Pokemon don't resemble any real-world animals or objects. Instead, they have much more abstract designs that evoke an idea. Heatran, for example, has aspects of many different animals, but the overall design simply evokes the concept of lava monster. Similarly, Arceus's design looks fittingly divine, while Darkrai's definitely looks like something that would give you nightmares. I think a big reason for this is that most of these Pokemon are designed to be very ancient, like from the beginning of the universe, and therefore it makes sense that they wouldn't resemble modern-day animals. Narrowing in on the group of Palkia, Dialga, and Giratina, I like how all of their designs feel very connected to that of Arceus, particularly their faces. Not only does this do a good job of communicating that they're a trio, but it also illustrates that they were the first Pokemon that Arceus created. The children resemble the parent, if you will. These designs are all very abstract, and while they're all quite complicated, I think they do a good job of making a Pokemon that looks legendary and powerful. The last group of Pokemon I want to look at this week is the Lake Trio of Uxie, Azelf, and Mesprit. I want to narrow in on these Pokemon specifically, because they're the first real instance of copy-paste design found in the Pokédex. All of these legendary Pokemon look very similar to one another, and are also very similar to Mew. While none of these designs necessarily look bad in their own right, Pokemon has already shown that it's possible to make a trio of legendaries that all look connected without sharing the exact same design with different hats. Unfortunately, this design philosophy will get worse before it gets better. Finally, as we have in the past, let's do a side-by-side comparison of Pokemon from this generation versus Pokemon from previous generations. While watching this apples to apples comparison, see if you can find any additional design trends or similarities that I may have missed. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this in the future. If you want to see more, check out the rest of this series. I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description. And join me next time where I'll be talking about the price of games. Do they cost too much, or should they actually cost more? Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.